Hi, everybody. It's Susan, and I'm back with a look at the Scorpio full moon this time. And it's quite special in a number of different ways. I'm just going to use that word special. You make of it what you like. It is definitely interesting in the sense that we have for the first time in 2 years, we have a Scorpio moon, which is not involving an eclipse. And that's really lovely because it just lowers the temperature a tiny bit. It is, in fact, because whenever we have a full moon, it's an opposition. So there's always a certain amount of tension. But the meaning of a full moon is some kind of an awareness or realization around something. And this will be exact on the 24th of April. I'm always using universal time. Just because I'm aware that there are people watching from all over the world. So you adjust for your own time zone. So it's just after midnight, almost 1 in the morning, universal time. That means it's on the 24th for Europe and anywhere east of that. And it's on the 23rd if you're in North or South America or east of that. And so basically we're looking at an energy of Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. And so we continue this theme of Mars. It's an ever-present theme for quite some time to come throughout the spring. And of course, it has been a big theme for us for the last 2 years, very strongly because of that energy of Scorpio and because of the energy of the eclipses going to Aries. So we went from Scorpio Taurus eclipses to Libra Aries axis, which is both axes involving love and money and all the challenges that that can represent in all different aspects of life, collectively and individually. Love and the opposite energy of hate, and money and the opposite energy of hey, no money. And so we enter into this intensity of Scorpio, and it is really a reflection of where we are psychologically as much as anything, based on the last couple of years. And so if you go back in time, this 4 degree, it's 4 degrees and 17 minutes of Scorpio, with, of course, the sun now newly into Taurus at 4 degrees, 17 minutes. It's the point at which we had the eclipses 2 years, rather a year ago in 2023. And I just want to pull that up so you can see. I'm going to pull that up as a separate chart, as if it were the transits to this one, and you can have a look at that. So I'm going to have first a look at that lunar eclipse that was on the 5th of May, 2023. And you'll notice that the south node is within 14 arc minutes of this moon, and the north node exactly 14 arc minutes, of course, to the sun. And so we're calling in something that happened a year ago. It's very relevant. It's still something quite active, and it still involves some of the key players that we're working with now. Saturn currently is at 15 degrees of Pisces. Back then, last year, it was at 5 degrees and 43 minutes of Pisces. And what I find interesting is the Saturn from this year is actually trining the moon. The Saturn from last year is trining the moon from this year. It was trining the north and the north node, no, the south node, and sextiling the north node. And the Saturn from this year is in a trine to the moon and a sextile to the sun from last year. So it's a really interesting entanglement. There seems to be this kind of theme here that is pulling in this seriousness, this intensity of the energy of the past 2 years. It's still lingering, and it's still something that we keep calling in. And the other thing that is still hovering from last year is this Chiron that was at 17 degrees. Today, it is roughly where we're finding a retrograde Mercury. And Chiron, of course, is today at 20 degrees. So Eris is roughly at the same place. Eris moves extremely slowly, just kind of inching back and forth through the degrees, over an extremely almost a 500-year cycle. And then Jupiter, if you remember way back then, was at the end of Aries. And then if you recall the 2 weeks before that, on the 20th of April, I won't look at that chart, but that was that 29-degree Aries eclipse, that 29 degrees Aries eclipse. And the nodes were still at that point. So they didn't move. They don't move very, very quickly, for the most part. And so the nodes were there. what was very striking was that the nodal axis at that time, you'll remember, was squaring Pluto. And guess who's there? Guess who's there still? So let's have a look now today again. And we see that now where those nodes were squaring Pluto, now we have the sun and the moon squaring Pluto. So we still have this intensity. We still have this energy of what is going on, but it's less to do with the sense of the collective future or past, or a sense of where we're headed, and much more in terms of realizations around things. The nodal axis has shifted, and we're much more in the realization of where we are today. And this is much more to do with our inner processing of what we're understanding. The energy of Scorpio represents our unconscious or psychological motivations, our emotional motivations. The Scorpio and Taurus axis in general represents the need for security, usually financial, but often emotional as well. And that security element you can extrapolate into the wider world, and into the, of course, private lives, depending on where you have Scorpio and Taurus in your chart. And I've been pointing this out for quite some time. So this video is just going to be the general energy. I'm just popping it up between two sessions, so I don't have time to go sign by sign, but you'll be able to find that in other ways through my other videos. So this square to Pluto, when we have a sun and a moon squaring Pluto, there's a challenge to our sense of our purpose, or a sense of what we understand about what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, what we might understand about ourselves. And Pluto is considered to be the modern day ruler of Scorpio. So that adds to the synastry, or the synergy, let's say, between those two energies, that Mars energy of the moon in Scorpio, and the strong Pluto power, which is that modern rulership. And so when the moon and Pluto are squaring, there is a tension, and there's some kind of pressure building. And that pressure can be from the outside. It can be issues of life and death. It's serious stuff, as we're seeing day by day, and that we might be dealing with in our own experience. And that can also be an emotional experience, meaning that there's something that we're realizing about patterns of behavior, or about emotional attachments, emotional connections, because we're dealing with fixed sign energies, and there are often issues of attachment and clinging, and a difficulty in changing, a difficulty letting go. We're here in this dynamic, we're being forced to let go. We're being forced to see that things have moved on, things have changed dramatically. We also have of course, this full moon is happening just after the conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus, which are also in Taurus. So we have the sun alongside Jupiter, Uranus now in Taurus. And this is also something that is still very much in play. It's still very much in action. And so that's part of this bigger story. And equally, the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus is still also being tracked by Mars, which is ruling the moon, ruling this full moon. And so that creates, again, this new dynamic. There's something new in the way that we're taking action, something new in the way that we're realizing that action may have been taken, and we now need to digest that, and to come to grips with that, or come to a realization around what has happened. Look for where you find Scorpio in your chart to have that sense of realization. And if you're not sure, just feel what's going on in your life, because you can intuit much of these things as well. It's not usually so far out that you haven't got a sense of what's already going on in your life. And in fact, with Scorpio Taurus, it's a really good idea to practice internalizing all of these energies, because when you sense what's going on, you're not waiting for somebody outside of you to tell you what to do and to tell you what is going on. You're actually able to really feel, and that Taurus energy is very sensual, and the Scorpio energy is very sort of psychic and deeply intuitive. But it requires a tuning inwardly, because when we're trying to listen for guidance, when we're trying to get something from somebody else, it's not going to be as clear as what you're sensing from the inside. So that's forever, but especially right now when we're dealing with this Scorpio moon. The moon is not super happy in Scorpio. It's not very comfortable because it's ruled by Mars. And Mars is about separation and about tension and an idea of not being safe or needing to somehow take action based on fear or based on some kind of concern around usually a lack of trust, a lack of love, a lack of money. And so we end up with a lot of control. There can be a lot of control around behavior, and there can be a lot of control around emotions. There can be a lot of control around circumstances, simply because, again, the circumstances might be so dodgy or chaotic that there's no other or better response than to simply control what's going on. So that's not a judgment call, but it's a realization. You want to just simply become aware that there can be a strong tendency around control. Now, of course, that can again apply globally, and of course, it can apply in your individual life. Where we want to use that Pluto with the square to that moon and the square to the sun is to recognize where we don't really run the show. And Pluto squaring this dynamic is showing us we're just not in control. And that's not a judgment in terms of not being able to control our circumstances around us. That's one aspect of this, but it's actually the literal truth of life itself. We are not running this show. We are not the ones controlling this. And so it's really about having faith in life itself. And with issues around Scorpio, particularly, it's very good, and particularly as Pluto is anyway demanding this of us, it's very good to practice this notion of I'm not doing this myself, I'm not controlling this. It doesn't mean that you're a victim of life. That's really the opposite of what I'm saying here. What it means is to recognize that things are happening, and the thing that we can control is not the outside stuff, but our response to what's happening and our emotional and psychological feelings around that and sense of what's going on. And the more that we have this feeling that we either on the one polarity that we have to control and wrestle everything to the ground, or on the other hand, that none of this is in my control and I might as well just give up and wait for somebody to tell me what to do, those polarities will always cause disruption, not only in your own experience, but in life around you, because it's extremely destabilizing when people operate from that place of either hyper control and micromanaging, or from the victim consciousness, which makes everybody else take responsibility. And there's nothing that anybody resents more than having to be responsible for the people around them when they are maybe in their adult life and they're not in diapers, or you might be in diapers and again, but that's a different situation altogether, which makes me think actually in terms of the US president, this is something that is going to really reflect Joe Biden's chart. No disrespect to him, but I mean, let's face it, the man has gone well beyond his prime. And now we're looking, I'm going to put Joe Biden in the center and see he is being really profoundly affected by this because he is getting towards his Pluto opposition. So in two ways, we've got Pluto by his natal chart. Pluto is squaring this full moon, or rather the moon is squaring his Pluto. And then by transits as well, he's coming up with the transiting square from his third house of the mind, of his communications, memory, all kinds of aspects of learning and travel and connections with people, interactions with people, exchanges with people. And the moon and the sun are in the axis of health and healing, reflecting something that is changing, that is something that is really quite impactful. Only a couple of days before, in fact, directly at the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, the sun was conjoining his natal moon. And so his natal moon squaring his natal Pluto, squaring the transiting Pluto, or being squared by the transiting Pluto, is very much a part of all of this. And so I do expect that he will be having a rough time around this time. He has been since last year. If you remember, again, his chart was also affected by last April, May, when the nodes were passing over his moon. And this has been something that he's been grappling with over these this last year or even longer in terms of this health and healing axis. It's sixth house is also your work, your everyday work, and the 12th house is convalescence and confinement. And I do suspect that this will be the beginning of the end of this cycle for him. I think that by the time that Jupiter enters into the seventh house, that he will no longer be, and that's the 25th of May, that he will no longer be doing his job, that he will either be unwell or he will be in some way convalescing or stepping back. We see that Uranus and Jupiter were exactly opposite his Mercury, again, with reference to speech and the mind and connection and engaging with people in one way or another. And then gradually, as Jupiter moves forward, and then Uranus moves forward up to the 27th degree in later in the year, and then that will be on the 1st of September, stationing retrograde at the 27th degree opposite his sun. If he's not out of his role by May, which I would wonder if I really think he's not going to make it through the spring, not necessarily dying, but certainly not anymore really able to be in office. I think it's going to be by the 1st of September that we see something of a major shift because the sun represents not only oneself, but it also represents one's career and one's role in society, one's purpose, you could describe it as, or one's job. And that's in the axis also of work, the sixth house representing work. So that's changing quite fundamentally. And at the same time that that's happening, his natal square to Chiron will be activated. And so when transiting, Uranus is squaring Chiron and opposing the sun, it's really likely that there's going to be some kind of incident because Chiron is ruled by the sun, it's Leo Chiron. And I think there's going to be some kind of health incident that will emerge, or perhaps a crisis that can emerge. We also have Mars in the, it's in a trine again to the Mercury and a trine to the sun. So he's under a lot of pressure. And as much as he would want to continue, I think there's just no more gas in the tank, and he's just going to have to step back. And I think politically, his entourage will want him to step back sooner rather than later because it just makes the election cycle a whole lot easier. As far as I can see, astrologically, he's not going to make it to the elections. He won't be at all involved in the elections come November. So there we are for Joe. Good luck to you, Joe. And yeah, so I wanted to also show you, hang on just a moment. It's a busy week. So we have this moon, and perhaps I just want to again emphasize the ruler of this moon before I continue. The moon itself is ruled by Mars, the traditional ruler. You can use Pluto if you want, but you'll get, I think, much more real specificity if you use the traditional rulers, and at the very least, complementarity. And so the Mars in Pisces is also ruled by Jupiter, which again is a big player. It's in sextile to this Mars, and it's ruled by Jupiter, which is now conjoining Uranus. So we do see that there's this pull towards higher values. There's a pull now towards something of a bigger vision that we're becoming aware of. We're becoming aware of something that is psychologically disturbing. As I mentioned, the moon in Scorpio is not terribly comfortable because of that Mars energy. There's this feeling of maybe unease, or a feeling of not being entirely psychologically safe. And so there can be this intensity, again, needing to control, and especially with that square of Pluto. But it can also be an intensity of needing to purge, needing to just change, needing to break this kind of pressure, like a safety valve. And with this Jupiter ruled by Venus, who's unfortunately not in great dignity, but in a semi-sextile to both Mars and to Jupiter, there is a great deal of pressure around relationships, around our values, around issues of what do we find important in life? And these are the big questions, and not just little details. Of course, for many people, it will also be the details about banking and about the day-to-day stuff of life. But I think also at this time, we are all being collectively and individually pushed in a direction which has us reflecting on these last 2 years really powerfully, and especially since last year, very strongly. You can also go back to November, and I'll do that now. If we go back to November of 2023, so keeping in mind that that was still in the axis of the that flavor, let's say, of the previous 2 years eclipses, now with the nodes newly into the still Mars ruled Aries and the Venus ruled South node, we see then that there was this big story from that point with Mars. Again, we're not escaping this Mars in these last couple of years, and you can feel it in the air. And I didn't need to point that out to you, but that Mars energy now in opposition to Uranus, and that's exactly where we find Uranus today. So we're really looking at a recollection of last year, whether it be through May or through November. Go over your experience of life, what was new for you, especially last November, what was in your awareness, what was being highlighted for you last year in the spring, and start to notice what is calling in, what is being called in now. Because there's a deep reflection of all that we've accomplished or understood or dealt with in the last couple of years, especially in the last year, and especially in the last 6 months, where there's now a realization, and we're really pulling in this very strong realization around that. Now, the last time at the new moon, Venus was in good dignity, but she was with the South Node. So if the South Node is there, the nodes are the enemies of the luminaries. The nodes block the light of the sun and or the moon. And so we have a certain dignity of Venus, a dignity of Mars last year in November, but at the same time we have that nodal axis disrupting that energy, and so this is something we can reflect on as well, because there's a weakening of the Venusian qualities of harmony and concession and cooperation. And then at the same time, if we look at, it's interesting to always look at how these cycles compare. If you look at the last of the new moon, that is the beginning of this cycle, we see that Eris was on the North Node, where we still find Eris today. That was a retrograde Eris. And today's Eris and Venus are together, where the Eris and North Node were last November. Now in last November, we had the Chiron at 16 degrees. Now we have the Mercury retrograde at 16 degrees, both of which are really tightly on the North Node. So you see how these things are lining up, and we're just now kind of processing. So now we're kind of getting a feeling of, what have I digested? What have I understood from all of that? What, especially, we get digestion through Virgo, and we get the excretion through Scorpio. So what can I let go of? What can I literally excrete, and what can I change in this sense? And sorry, I'm speaking really fast because I've got a client coming very soon. So I just want to point out a couple of really interesting things that are coming up this week as well, which are part of this phase. And this full moon phase is going to wind down, let's say, this whole eclipse cycle. It's the first lunation outside of the eclipses in the axis of the nodes, but I believe that the eclipse cycle is only finally ended in the next lunation, which means that for the next 2 weeks, we're still carrying a lot of this eclipse energy from the 8th of April. Now, I want to show you the upcoming transits, which is, the first one is on the 25th. We have Mercury stationing direct. It's been retrograde since the 1st of April. And so we'll have Mercury direct while we've got still a very tight conjunction, less than a degree, between Jupiter and Uranus. And Venus will still be conjoining Eris, so still some tension around issues of money. Venus not in good dignity because she's still in Mars-ruled Aries. And of course, Mars itself is still ruled by that Jupiter. They're now moving apart, but they're still in a 3-degree orb of a sextile. And both Mars as well as Neptune are in a trine to the moon on that day when Mercury stations. And the moon itself has moved forward now, still in Scorpio, but moved forward into an opposition with Jupiter and Uranus. All that to say that if you think about this full moon as an extended arc of time, don't make any plans. Don't settle on anything. And I don't want to say don't trust anything, because I don't want you to be distrustful, but just have a healthy skepticism around things. We have Mars moving into Neptune, which I'm going to speak about in a minute. But it's really more about understanding how you might need to reflect on certain things before we actually get to a place where you can actually take action. And I'll show you how in the next couple of days going forward, you can find better times to take action. My advice would be wait till May in general for anything really important, or just to take a breather. But in the meantime, you can also just notice how things are improving bit by bit as we go forward. Right. So again, very, very quickly afterwards, we then have Venus moving into Taurus. Now she's gaining a lot of dignity. She's not in strong dignity in Mars ruled Aries because she's actually ruling Libra. So that means that she's in her fall in Aries. And so she's now in her home, in her nighttime or nocturnal home of Taurus, and where she's bright and cozy, except that now she's still under the what we call under the beams of the sun. Only slowly afterwards, after in May, when she's now moving into the beams, she's going to keep going deeper and deeper into the belly of the sun until they actually line up on the 4th of June, which means that although Venus is happy, we've got her now under the beams of the sun. And so it feels like things are going to be more hidden. Things, whether they're solutions or relationship issues or money issues, things are going to be done more behind the scenes. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's nefarious. It just means it's not necessarily visible, or that the results are not necessarily visible. And I think ultimately we're going to get only a lot more visibility when we get that Jupiter trining Pluto in the end of May and the beginning of June. So again, if you can wait on things, just wait until then. If there's no rush for things, you'll get a lot more clarity. Of course, life goes on, and we often have to act before time. I skipped over a really important one. Hang on, let me go back. I want to go to the Mars and Neptune. There we go, Mars and Neptune. Yeah, indeed, it's only hours before Venus moves into Taurus. We've got Mars and Neptune conjunct. That's where things are also a little bit dodgy, a little bit confused. Things are not really clear. It can be where either the action is delusional or not really appropriate, say it's not the right thing in some way or shape or form, or it can be that it's confusing in the sense of I just don't know where to begin, so I'm just going to sit here. I just don't even know where do I start, and that can also have you feeling tired. It can feel like what's the point, a kind of a giving up. Hang on, if you do have that feeling, just hang on, just give it some time, let the space clear, let the fog lift, and then take action when Mars gains dignity by moving into Aries. And so I'll show you that. So keep in mind, Mars, Neptune conjoins. A few hours later, Venus is going to move into Taurus, gaining a lot of strength and a lot of support, but still not a little bit under the radar. By the way, that I forgot to mention, I'll come back to that. Venus is going to be then moving into a square to Pluto when she does move in. So the sun and moon are squaring Pluto right now at the full moon on the 24th or 23rd, depending where you live. And Venus is squaring Pluto. So again, this is about issues of relationships and money, big changes that require restructuring. This happens annually, roughly. A little bit more than once a year, because Venus's cycle is about 9 months or so. And so we have this square also later in the year. We're going to have this again in either November, December. I think it's early December. But nonetheless, a good time to reflect on issues of money. You'll see that in the world as well. Big changes around money, necessary changes, perhaps also issues dealt with in secret, or at the very least, things that are not talked about, even if they're not specifically secretive. And now finally, and I'm going to have to end it on this, we've got Mars going into Aries, and this will gain a lot of dignity for Mars. We have a lot going on in this energy of Aries. It's very, very busy. It's not going to let up again through till May. This is what we got right now. So Mars is a big, heavy hitter. Venus is very strong. The month of April and May are in this tension, actually including March too, March, April, May, in this tension between Mars and Venus. But at least right now they're being honest with each other. They're being frankly who they are, and there's a sense of clarity around action through Mars. And there's also the sense of clarity around the issues that Venus is representing. And I just noticed that also the moon is conjunct Pluto, Venus is squaring that moon Pluto, and that adds to this quality of, and then it's sextiling that Mars. So this adds to the quality of everything that I've just been saying, which is about recognizing where things need to change. In this case, highlighting that moon Pluto can make us deeply emotional. And so if there are any relational issues or relationship issues, or hey, let's face it, diplomacy issues, I think things can get quite heated and tense. There's a lot of stubborn energy here with a lot of fixed energy, and then the impulsiveness of Mars and Aries. Things can get quite lit up, I think, especially as Mars was being a little obfuscated by Neptune, and things may not have been terribly, terribly clear. So do make the most of this time to really go deep inside, to have a sense of what it is that you're feeling in this moment and what can you understand about what needs to change in your life, understanding motivations, understanding issues of power struggles, power games. Again, you can look at that globally, but do look inside, because this is always at play within ourselves. And that energy of Scorpio also represents the shadow side. The same thing with Pluto. It represents our more shadowy aspects. And since Mercury is on the North Node all through the rest of April, it's a good time to check, because Rahu itself, the North Node, represents the shadows. It represents things that are blown out of proportion or not really clear. It's an obfuscator, remember. And so we can see that there's some kind of healing that we need to do, remembering that we, projecting onto others what is our own to deal with will feel like it's empowering. It will feel like it's something that is helpful, but it never is. It's just lashing out. And that projection, when we see that projection, it's usually pretty obvious, because the shadow is very obvious to everyone but ourselves. And so notice that in yourself, wherever you feel the tendency or the desire to project onto others something that you feel frustrated by in your own life, or situations that are happening in relational or financial areas of your life, then call it back in, get quiet, and try to understand how you can elevate your thinking to think of the sense of Scorpio as that. In the old astrology, Scorpio was represented by the phoenix rising from the ashes. And so you go in deep and you purify something, you transform it, and off you go. Your wings can spread and something is different going forward. And so I wish that for you. I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. I have a live session on Sunday evening, if you are able to join me on Sunday the 21st, and we'll look at that conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus, and look at some charts as well for those of you who are attending. So do join me if you can. And in the meantime, I will see you in the next video. Bye.